Joined now by our Canucks reporter, Jeff Paterson of Rink Wide. Jeff, good morning. How are you?
I'm good, guys.
Your thoughts on Hughes as captain, official?
Yeah, like I've said it many times on your show, I was in the Elias Pettersson for captain camp, so I'm not disappointed. I didn't have it out for Quinn Hughes. I just always thought that the Swedish lineage, the best offensive player. I thought there were a lot of reasons why Elias Pettersson made sense, but there is uncertainty around his future here. Let's be honest. And I'm sure that played into it, but also the fact that really from the day Rick Tocchet landed on the scene here, he was blown away by Quinn Hughes as a player, but more so, I think, as a person, and his voice grew. And if you go back to even, before Rick Tocchet was the coach, the whole sticking up for Tanner Pearson thing, I thought really kind of, captivated the market in terms of, boy, this guy's like, ballsy. He's going to stand up to the organization, stand up to the man here. And I think, he already had a ton of respect, but I think that was just shining a new light on sort of a different side of Quinn Hughes. And so we know how much he played under Rick Tocchet down the stretch. He wanted to play more, which seems crazy, but 30 minutes a night, and he was willing to take on more. This guy's just been an overachiever throughout his life, really, when you go back to, his college days and certainly the first 4 full seasons in the National Hockey League. All he has done to this point is answer the call and answer the challenge. So I'm sure he'll step into this role. Look, ultimately, this is about what does it mean in the room. People try to make it out about, he's got to meet with the media or he's got to deal with officials. Being a captain in today's NHL is, I think, being a leader of men inside that room. And the players know the real ones. They know who the leaders are. And even if Quinn Hughes didn't have the C on his jersey, he'd still be a leader on this hockey club without a doubt, because he is one of their best players. But I think he'll do a nice job. And I think the players recognize that absolutely he is one of the leaders in that locker room.
Winning teams have more than one great player on them, so somebody can't be the captain. There is only one ultimately.
Good point.
Are there hurt feelings for a guy like Elias Pettersson? Leon Draisaitl can't be the captain.
Miller.
You go around the league, a lot of superstars just can't be captain. There can only be one captain.
Hey, Daniel couldn't be the captain.
Right.
Henrik was, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're right. The other option was to go without a captain. And 3 A's, and I know they did that down the stretch, and that made sense, turning the page from Bo Horvat, and Rick Tocchet was on the, still brand new to the job and the city and the market and everything else. Like, that made sense for them. I didn't like the idea of going a full season with 3 A's because, to your point, Blake, and look, this is not to be taken as a knock on JT Miller in any way, but if you have 3 A's, you don't have a C. And human nature is that there's going to be a louder voice than others in that room. And that's JT's personality. And I'm not saying that he would have tried to take all the oxygen and become the de facto captain. But human nature is like that's just the way that he leads his life. And both Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson a little more subdued. Now we'll see if we see and hear more of Quinn Hughes emerging now that they have stamped the C on his jersey. But I just think that there would have been a vacuum created that could have led to some situations. There's no doubt now. The organization has spoken. Quinn is the leader, and everybody else has to fall in line. But there is a leadership group that's been identified, and I would assume that we will hear in short order that Pettersson and Miller will wear the A's the way that they did down the stretch late last season. So, hurt feelings? I don't think so, because, again, I go back to the uncertainty around Elias Pettersson, and I do think that had there been a contract extension in place, maybe the conversation was a little bit different, but I just don't think that the organization wanted to go down that road until all the I's were dotted and T's were crossed, and they've got a player that's under club control for 3 more years. And again, as we said, this guy's done things that nobody has ever done in franchise history. Quinn Hughes is one of the best Vancouver Canucks of all time, and I don't say that lightly. He's only played here 4 full seasons, but I think that he's cemented his spot, and this is a reflection of what the organization thinks of him.
So you think Miller will submit to his authority?
Well, I think he better. I hope we don't have a revolt on our hands in that locker room, and I'm sure the Canucks are hoping that's not the case. JT wants to win. Ultimately, the guy's competitive. Look, Ryan Kessler didn't wear the C when Henrik Sedin did. Totally diametrically opposed personalities, right? But they all came together for the common good of winning, and they did a lot of it. Ultimately didn't get it quite right on June 15th. But, I think they can coexist. And again, I think Quinn Hughes, with his performance on the ice, has the absolute and utmost respect of every other player in that locker room. If he doesn't, then it's not Quinn that's got the problem. It's whoever doesn't acknowledge Quinn's role in all of this.
Mm-hmm. Marcus Naslund was very honest. We choked, right?
Yep.
Bo Horvat was, for the most part, nothing to see here, unless it was obvious there was something to see there. Henrik used it a little bit to sort of scold teammates, for lack of a better term, or motivate them, push them a little bit. What kind of captain do you think Quinn Hughes will be?
I think he's going to be more lead by example. I don't expect that he's going to stand and make great proclamations. Again, this is a team that's still trying to find its way out of the wilderness and has pretty much all of his days here. Henrik, at the back end of his tenure as captain, had some rough seasons, but obviously also had some really good seasons and a lot of winning and didn't have to explain a lot of the winning away. Horvat, he took over, and again, things were sort of on the downswing then. And so, I think some of that matters as well. Let's hope for everybody's sake that this organization starts to get some traction and there are some more wins to talk about rather than having to explain away yet another loss after another loss after another loss and those types of things. So, I think Quinn Hughes will have some learning here. He's going to have to find his way and find his voice. But again, I think we have seen a little bit of that emerge. And I think ultimately, he's going to do what he does, and that is set franchise records and then rewrite the record book with better seasons. He's done that each of the last 2 years, and we'll see if he can up his own personal performances. But, I think he's at a point in time now, he's going to turn 24 here next month, where he recognizes that even if he's putting up close to 80 points and Elias Pettersson's putting up 102, what did it matter? They still finished 10 plus points out of the playoffs. And so it's about doing what you do and bringing all of that to the ice, but it's also finding a way to make this team better, this organization better. And it is about winning, and they haven't done enough of that lately. So let's hope that this is turning a page and starting to move in the right direction.
Does it change the player at all, do you think? Do you think as a captain feels, I've got to be even extra defensively aware, and or do you think he's able to push the responsibility things aside and just be him?
Yeah, I think he is who he is. Again, are there going to be some situations where you turn to a captain and lean on a captain? Yeah. But, this isn't a guy that's in his second or third year now. Like, he's going into his fifth full season in the National Hockey League. He's grown up around the game. He's seen an awful lot, even in his young years. I think his eyes are wide open here. But ultimately, he's just a terrific player. And I think he'll continue to be that for the Vancouver Canucks. And, and when we'll start to see him round out some of the other elements that go into being a leader and ultimately being the captain of this hockey club.
We've joked about this before, but now that it's actually happened, does it root the captain in the city any longer? Past the contract and all that sort of thing. Hey, have they traded captains? They've traded captains. We know that there's a history of that, but I think that teams generally do select guys they think are going to be there for a long, long time.
Right. I mean, as long as his brothers are in the league and he's the oldest of the three, I mean, there's always going to be that speculation that the Hughes brothers want to play together. I suppose I would answer the question this way, Blake. If he is captain for 3 years until his contract expires and this team hasn't made headway,
right, whose fault is that? Yes,
it's probably time to throw the baby out with the bathwater at that point and really start over. And who knows where Elias Pettersson is going to be playing at that point. So they've got him under club control for 3 more years. Really, they should be statistically the prime of his career here. And as I said, it feels after this dark decade, it is so time for this group to make some headway and gain some traction. So. I don't have the answer to that question, but at the end of these 3 years, when his contract expires, if they're no further ahead, then, he probably wants out, and maybe it's time to just move on and try it all over again.
Well, boy, if Elias leaves, it might be a accelerated time. Very big season, as we know, coming up for the Vancouver Canucks. Jeff, last captaincy question for some time, I promise.
Yeah,
it's our Bodog poll question. Will Gary Bettman ever present the Stanley Cup to Captain Quinn Hughes?
Wow. I mean, I focus more on the Bettman part of that than the Quinn Hughes part.
That's true.
Ditto.
That's true.
Because I think we're living year to year at this point in terms of his he's not living year to year, but as commissioner, his term and his tenure.
Jeff, a wise Canuck executive told me we're all just living day to day, brother.
Right, yeah.
Trust me. I know that drill. But yeah, so I look more at the commissioner and how long he's going to be in that role. And boy, if I give him a few more years, are the Canucks going to be Stanley Cup contenders by then? I'm probably answering no to the poll question just because there are moving parts here. And I'm all for it. Hey, if they can expedite the process here, make it happen, sign me up. But I'm going to answer no to that poll.
I hear you, and I'm with you. Let's move on, Jeff, to well, you were talking to some of the Canucks Friday during one of their informal skates there. I know Dakota Joshua and Anthony Beauvillier both had some things to say. What caught your ear from the interviews on Friday with the informal Canucks skate?
Yeah, I mean, it's been kind of funny the way they've done it, and I don't blame, a lot of the key veterans, Pettersson and Tanner Pearson, and, some of these guys that we want to talk to. They're playing the card that these are informal skates. I don't have to do the media necessarily. I'll be available when training camp starts. So it could be another week or so before we hear from some of them. But some of the guys a little further down the pecking order, they've been good. And the team has facilitated, a couple of guys per day so that we're not burning through every single guy 2 weeks ahead of training camp. And yeah, on Friday when I was out there, Dakota Joshua and Anthony Beauvillier, and of course, contract year for both of those guys. There are so many Canucks that are on expiring contracts. That's going to be a story as the season moves along. But for Beauvillier, the newcomer, and all of a sudden, his contract is up, and what's his future here, and where's he going to slot in? And I won't be surprised if he gets the opportunity to start the season alongside Elias Pettersson and Andrei Kuzmenko, which is where he played the bulk of his time after the trade. On a really good team, is Anthony Beauvillier a top-line forward? Probably not. He's more suited, I think, to middle six. But when you're playing with Elias Pettersson, that can certainly boost your stock. So I'm sure on the contract side, I asked him about it being a contract year, and he downplayed that and just said if I focus on everything else, the contract should take care of itself, sort of the standard hockey stock there. But he's just excited to get a chance to start from the start. It's got to be difficult to uproot your life and, join midstream in a team at that time that was in turmoil and everything else. So I think he knows the players. He knows the landscape. He had 36 games under Rick Tocchet. So I think for Beauvillier, now is the fresh start. That last year, it was just about getting his bearings, and he's excited to get going here with these informal skates and ultimately as they lead into training camp. For Dakota Joshua, I mean, at this time last year, none of us knew anything about Dakota Joshua, and it really was a proving season. He had to prove that he was a National Hockey Leaguer, and the Canucks clearly saw something in him to give him a 2-year contract, and the guy can play. There's no doubt, and we know that he caught Rick Tocchet's eye. Saw his ice time spike. I mean, at one point, Tocchet talked about Dakota Joshua being a 20-goal scorer in the National Hockey League. That just feels like a stretch to me. But again, he's got the confidence of the coach, and you would think for any hockey player, that would mean an awful lot. And certainly Joshua expressed that sentiment. I asked him about the fact that this organization went out and targeted players that could help with the penalty kill in free agency, and he seemed pretty excited about that and recognized that maybe it allows them to back off guys like Pettersson and Miller a little bit in terms of the ice time devoted to that area of the game. If they can bring in other guys that can help, and then that'll allow Pettersson and Miller, in theory, to do more in the offensive zone, although they did an awful lot in the offensive zone shorthanded down the stretch last year. But Joshua, he had a funny line where he said, the penalty kill was an issue. I don't think it could be much worse. And I was like, nope, you guys were 32nd, Dakota. It can't, when you're 32nd in the National Hockey League, I mean, I guess by percentage points it could be, but in terms of league ranking. So I think he recognizes that was an area of concern. We all know how demoralizing that had to be. The number of nights that the penalty kill sunk them. So, we're still a few weeks away from putting rubber to the road, I guess, in terms of seeing what this new look penalty kill can do for the Vancouver Canucks. But Joshua seemed pretty excited to think that they've bolstered that area of the game.
Well, I mean, there's a school of thought that he should be a part of that penalty kill unit. Of course, they've got a couple of forwards coming now in Pius Suter.
Well, before we leave these two guys, if we're going to make the playoffs, if we're going to see this team make the playoffs, these are the kinds of guys that need to have career years, right? Like there is upside there for both players, as you just talked about, as the coach believes in them. If both of these players can have spike years and it's going to be within a certain scale, we're not talking 30 goals here, but if these kinds of players have career years, then that is the kind of recipe for the Canucks to make the playoffs alongside regular performance from the superstars.
Yeah, and I think in Beauvillier's case, and he recognized the fact, he was asked about the fact that there are an awful lot of wingers on this roster, and he recognized that and talked about internal competition. So he's aware of the landscape at the very least. But, I think there is this prevailing thought that Andrei Kuzmenko is going to have trouble getting to 39 again just on the percentages. Well, if Kuzmenko's production falls even a little bit, I mean, maybe a guy like Beauvillier on the other side of Elias Pettersson can pick up some of that slack. He's been a 20-goal scorer once. I think it was his rookie season in the National Hockey League, but he hasn't been able to get back there. And
that seems reasonable to ask.
Yeah, exactly. Especially, and we don't know about his power play situation and who's going to get the bumper spot and all those types of things. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a route there for Anthony Beauvillier to certainly challenge the best offensive season that he has had, which would be good for him. It would be good for the Canucks in the short term. And then if they look like he's a trade chip at the deadline, if the season's not going the way that they wanted, you'd like to think that he could up his value if he has a big year and responds to the opportunity to play alongside Elias Pettersson. So you're right. I go back to look, they didn't miss the playoffs last year because Elias Pettersson and Quinn Hughes let them down. It was the organization still hasn't surrounded those guys with enough of a supporting cast. They think they've done some of that. They've addressed an area of great weakness on the penalty kill. And, I keep saying if the penalty kill can even be league average, I mean, that would be leaps and bounds from one that was dead last in the National Hockey League. And for stretches last year was pushing 60%, which is just still mind-boggling all these months later. So, yeah, I mean, I do think that the Canucks have improved. Have they improved? I know we've talked about have they closed the gap and all those types of things. Pacific Division looks like it's going to be difficult again. So I do think if they're going to make a push for the playoffs, it's probably for one of those wild card spots in the West.
Beauvillier was 20 points, 9 goals in 33 games as a Vancouver Canuck last year, playing 17 minutes a night. Dakota Joshua was 11 goals, 23 points, playing 11 and a half minutes a night, although Dakota, if I'm not mistaken, had a nice little charge there at the end. And Beauvillier had a big dry spell, Jeff.
Yeah.
But was able to snap out of it. We'll see what the future holds for them, including whether Beauvillier will be in that power play bumper spot in place of Bo Horvat. Jeff, marvelous stuff. Thanks for this. We'll catch up soon.
Okay, guys. Thanks.
This clip brought to you by Interchange Recycling. Visit interchangerecycling.com to learn more and to find your closest recycling center.